Alright, today's video is about finding roots, perfect squares, and cubed roots. So our objective is students will be able to find the nth root of a number. Students will be able to find the nth root of a number. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, what is a root? What does that look like? A lot of you are probably familiar with this sign. And people often refer to this as a square root. So you might see something like the square root of 16. Well, what does that mean? When it says the square root of 16, what that's saying is what number times itself equals 16. What's the number times itself that equals 16? And the reason that we often call this a square root is that there's actually a 2 here. This is a hidden 2. This is a hidden 2. It's asking what number times itself once, or what number times itself one time gets you 16. So let's kind of think about this. What could we do to get 16? Now, a lot of people, and this is how I want you to share your work, what two numbers times itself gives you 16? You've learned previously that what times what equals 16. Well, we know that 4 times 4 equals 16. But we need to expand this a little bit further, because there's actually one other way to get 16. We also know that a negative times a negative will give us a positive. So if we do negative 4 times negative 4, we also get 16. So what we want to know from this is that when we ask you what is the square root of 16, we're not simply just asking you what two numbers, we're asking you what two numbers multiply to get 16, but we need to think of it in a broader picture, because we could have two positive 4s, or we could have two negative 4s. And when we write that solution, we're going to write it that we could either have a positive 4 or a negative 4. And oftentimes how they denote that is plus or minus 4. What that means is you could have a positive 4 or a negative 4. So that's the basic idea of a square root. You also might think of it like this. What is 4 squared? What is 4 squared? Well, 4 squared means what is 4 times 4? 4 times itself 2 times. That equals 16. Okay? 4 times 4, that's going to equal 16. So you should start to see the parallel here. 4 times 4 is 16. The square root, or with the hidden 2, the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. Remember that we could also have had a negative 4 squared. A negative 4 squared. That means negative 4 times itself, which is going to give us a 16. So one thing, a key point that you need to remember from this is that when we're taking the square, it's going to be plus or minus the answer, because we could have a positive 4 or a negative 4. And that's also why this is called what it's called. This right here, this is called the 4 squared. Okay, this is saying 4 squared. This, with our hidden 2, this is a square root. So they all tie into each other. Okay, so one thing we need to learn about is square roots. Now, normally you're not going to see this. Let's do another example. Okay, let's say I asked you what is the square root of 25. Now, there's no 2 here. It doesn't have a 2 here, but you can assume it's asking you what number times itself gives you 25. So, what number times itself gives you 25? Well, I know that 5 times 5 gives me 25. But I also know that negative 5 times negative 5 gives me 25. So we know our solution can be 5 or negative 5, and we're going to write that as plus or minus 5. Alright, let's talk about another kind of root that can exist, and that is a cubed root. So a cubed root looks very similar, but slightly different. It's going to look something like this. The cubed root of 27. Okay, so this means, and it's written as the cubed root asking us what number times itself let's actually write out the number 3 times equals 27. So what number times itself 3 times equals 27? Now, with a cubed root, this root will not be hidden. Before, when we were doing the square root, we would just have a symbol like the square root of 25. And we assume there's a 2 here, but it's hidden. If it's a cubed root, the 3 will be there. So what it's asking us is what number can we multiply by itself 3 times and get 27? So what number can we multiply by itself 3 times and get 27? Now this takes a little bit of thinking, but I know that if I multiply 3 times 3, I get 9. If I multiply 9 by 3, I get 27. So I know that 3 times 3 times 3 gives us 27. My pen was acting up a little bit. I want you to make sure that you notice that these are not decimal points, okay? This is multiplying. I'm asking you what number times itself 3 times gives you 27. 3 times 3 times 3, that gives me 27. Now I also know that does anything else give me 27? Is there any other way I can get 27? Let's try using a negative number. Let's try negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. Does that work? Well, negative 3 times negative 3 gives me a positive 9, and 9 times negative 3 gives me a negative 27. So this does not work. So we just have the cubed root of 27. The answer is 3. What is the cubed root of 27? The answer is 3. So let's go ahead and let's practice a couple of these. I'm going to have you go to the next slide. Let's kind of do these two together. This is asking us what is the square root of 100. So I'm thinking, okay, it's not here, but I know it's an imaginary 2 right here. What two numbers times themselves give me 100? Well, I know that 10 times 10 give me 100. I also know that negative 10 times negative 10 is 100. So my answer is going to be either 10 or negative 10. So I'm going to write that as the plus or minus 10. Or this equals plus or minus 10. All right, let's talk about the cube root. This is asking me what number times itself 3 times gives me 125. So what number times itself 3 times gives me 125? Well, I know that 5 times 5 gives me 25. So 25 times 5 is 125. So it's going to be 5 times 5 times 5. Now, can I use a negative 5? See, negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5. Does that work? Well, negative 5 times negative 5 gives me 25. And 25 times negative 5 is going to give me negative 125. So this does not work. So what's the cube root of 125? It's just 5. I want you to try these two practice problems. Go ahead and pause the video, try the two practice problems, and then press play to see the answers. Alright, here are the answers. On this question, okay, it was your second practice. Is actually 3 and 4, but this practice right here, let's actually change that so it's 3 and 4. Our numbering's a little messed up. On practice number 3, we should have had plus or minus 7 because it was the square root. Remember, there's a hidden 2 here. So what number times itself 1 time gives you 49, plus or minus 7. Here we had a cubed root. So what number times itself 3 times gives you 64? So 4 times 4 times 4 gives you 64. All right, let's talk about some other kind of tricky examples you might see. What happens when you see something like 2 to the negative 16th? Or you might just see the square root of negative 16. Remember that this 2 is hidden and might not always be there. So let's see if we can figure out what that is. It's asking us what number times itself gives us negative 16. So let's see what kind of stuff works. Let's try first 4 times 4. 4 times 4 gives me 16, positive 16. That does not work. Let's try another one. Let's try 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. Does that work? Well, negative 4 times negative 4, that's going to give me a positive 16 again. So that does not work. Let's cross that one out. Now, a common mistake that a lot of students make is they say, oh, you know what it is? It's 4 times negative 4. 4 times negative 4, that gives me a negative 16. And that's true. 4 times 4 does give you negative 16. But a key point to remember here is that the number you multiply itself means to be multiplied by itself. 4 is not the same number as negative 4. So I want to add a key point here. So our key point that we want to remember is that you must have the same number. You must have the same number. So 4 times negative 4 gives you negative 16, which is great, but 4 and negative 4 are not the same number. So this is an interesting situation, and the answer that you're going to have, okay, when it asks you what is the square root of negative 16, there is no number that you can multiply by itself and get negative 16. So the answer to that is going to be no solution, or sometimes you might write it as undefined. Okay, so undefined. Now, it's not every instance that a number that happens to be negative underneath a root or a radical is undefined or no solution. It depends on the power to which the root is being drawn. So let's do another example. Let's take, you say you have something like the cubed root of negative 27. So we're doing a separate example, and I'll draw a line to separate them. The cubed root of negative 27. So this is asking us what 3 numbers can we multiply together to get negative 27. So what times what times what gives me negative 27. Right? Well, I know that 3 times 3 times 3 gives me 27, but that doesn't give me negative 27, it gives me positive 27. Let's try 3 negative 3's. So negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. Does that give me negative 27? Well, negative 3 times negative 3 gives me a positive 27. And 27 times negative 3, that gives me a, negative 3 times negative 3 gives me a 9. I hope most of you caught that. And 9 times negative 3 gives me a negative 27. Right? So that ended up working. Negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 equals negative 27. So the cubed root of negative 27 is negative 3. So it's really important that as you go through these examples, you don't necessarily assume that just because it's negative, it's always going to be no solution. You could have an instance where it does work out. So right now, let's do a little more practice, and we're going to combine the idea of a negative number and also some of the positive numbers we were using before. So go ahead and try these 6 practice problems. Pause the video, and then press play when you're ready. Alright, go ahead and check your answers. Make sure that on numbers 1 and 2 you have plus or minus 2. Right? Plus or minus 2. Since it's a positive 4, you could either get positive 2 or negative 2 to get 4. And so 36, you could either get positive 6 or negative 6. On these ones, the only solution that works for a cubed root is positive 2. On negative 36, the only solution that works is at negative 6. Now, I wrote this here because this is a really common mistake, and I want you to look at number 4. You should always go back and check and see if it makes sense. This right here is a common mistake. It is not negative 6. Let's check and see if that works. Does negative 6 times negative 6, does that give you 36. No, it does not, right? And a lot of you probably had negative 6 here, and I wanted to address that one. There's nothing, no number that you can multiply by itself to give you negative 36. So the answer to this is no solution. No solution. Okay? Now, in this instance, we're asking you what number times itself 3 times can give you negative 64. And if you multiply negative 4 times itself 3 times, it does work. I want to give you one more just to throw it out there and see if you can get it. Let's try a 7th. See if you can find the square root of negative 16. It's kind of similar to the example we just did in number 4. Alright, you should have seen that there is no number you can multiply by itself 2 times. So the answer is no solution. No solution. Alright, the last thing we're going to talk about in this video is perfect squares. So this last section is going to be about perfect squares. Okay, now to introduce this, I'm just going to draw a square. If you think of this square and you saw that you had sides of 1 by 1, we know that the area of this square, it's a 1 by 1, the area is 1. I want you to think about, what if you had a square that was a 2 by 2? What would the area of this square be? It would be 4. And so if you want to find what the square root of 4 is, the square root is 2. This 4 is the perfect square. This 4 is a perfect square. So perfect squares are numbers that when we multiply a number like 2 times itself 1 time, we get 4. If we take the square root of 4, we get 2. It's like we're going back and forth between the two. So I'm just going to write out the first 12 perfect squares, and these are what we want you to remember. So you need to know the first 12 perfect squares. And if you ever get stuck and you can't remember what they are, you can use this method. So our first, 1 times 1 is going to give us 1. Okay? These in this column, this is the perfect square. So everything to the right is a perfect square. 2 times 2 gives us 4. 3 times 3 gives us 9. 4 times 4 gives us 16. 5 times 5 gives us 25. 6 times 6 gives us 36. 7 times 7 gives us 49. 8 times 8 gives us 64. 9 times 9 gives us 81. 10 times 10 gives us 100. A lot of these numbers probably look really familiar with you, right? And remember, if I asked you, really quickly, if I asked you, what's the square root of 1, you would say 1. If I asked you, what's the square root of 4, you would say 2. So it goes back to what you multiplied, okay? These are just numbers we know are perfect squares. I also, in addition to knowing up to 10, I also want you to know 11 and 12. So just really quickly, let's do 11 times 11 and 12 times 12. And I want you to just try using your calculator and see what you get. 11 times 11 and 12 times 12. Alright, you should have seen that 11 times 11 gave you 121. And 12 times 12 gave you 144. Okay? So, these perfect squares are something you need to memorize. And I want to give you an example of a type of test question that you might see. So, I'm going to give you an example. I might ask you, is 4 a perfect square? Is 4 a perfect square? So in your head, you need to think, okay, are there two numbers that I can multiply together to get 4? What times what can you give me 4? Okay. You should be able to say, oh, 2 times 2 gives me 4. So is 4 a perfect square? The answer is yes. So let's do another example. Let's say, is 3 a perfect square? Is 3 a perfect square? Okay, so in your head you should be thinking, okay, well, what times what can give me 3? The only thing that I can multiply to get 3 is 1 times 3. And these are not the same number, so this is not a perfect square. The answer is no. The last question I might ask you is, which of the following is not a perfect square? Which of the following is not a perfect square? So I might give you a list. I might say, is 4 a perfect square? Is 16 a perfect square? Is 18 a perfect square? Is 25 a perfect square? Is 36 a perfect square? Okay, so in your head you have to think, okay, can I multiply a number together to get these other numbers? Well, I know 4 times 4 is 2, so it's not going to be this. That is a perfect square, and we're looking for what is not. 4 times 4 gives me 16, so I know it's not 16. 18. Is there any number I can multiply by itself and get 18? I can do 9 times 2, but that's 2 different numbers. I can also do 3 times 6, but that's 2 different numbers. So I'm thinking it's probably 18, but I just want to keep going just to double check. What times what gives me 25? 5 times 5. And what times what gives me 36? 6. So the answer would be 18. Alright, go ahead and make sure if you have any questions, you write down your questions and get ready to practice in class.